In the busy city of Makando, Zuri thought she had finally found the man she was meant to spend her life with. Juma had swept her off her feet with sweet words and promises that felt like forever. He told her she would never have to face life's storms alone, that they would always stand side by side. When they walked through the markets together, people admired them, whispering how perfect they looked, two souls in love, building a future hand in hand. Zuri held onto those dreams tightly, believing every word Juma spoke. At home, she cooked his favorite meals, made their small house warm and welcoming, and filled every corner with love. She believed that if you gave love selflessly, it would come back to you in the same way. But slowly, shadows began to creep into their marriage. Juma was not the gentle man the world saw. Behind closed doors, his patience ran thin, his promises faded, and his love began to feel more like a duty than a choice. Zuri noticed the change in his eyes, how they no longer sparkled when he looked at her, how his voice turned cold when she asked for little things like time or attention. The world still saw the perfect couple, but Zuri felt the cracks growing deeper each day. She told herself love was about sacrifice, about holding on, about believing tomorrow would be better. Yet in the quiet of the night when she lay awake, her heart whispered a truth she was too afraid to face. Forever might not be what Juma truly promised. Zuri's life slowly started to change, but not in the way she had once dreamed. At first, it was just small things. She would feel tired more than usual, her body weak after doing simple chores. She thought it was nothing, maybe just stress or long days. But soon the tiredness grew worse. Her hands would shake, her legs felt heavy, and sometimes her vision blurred. There were days when pain spread through her body like fire, and nights when she couldn't sleep because every breath felt like a struggle. Instead of getting better, her health kept falling apart. One afternoon while cooking, Zuri fainted on the kitchen floor. When she opened her eyes, she saw Juma standing over her, not with worry but with irritation. "Zuri, you need to stop pretending," he snapped. "Money doesn't grow on trees. Do you want me to waste everything on hospital bills?" His words cut deeper than the pain in her body. She thought he would hold her, comfort her, or at least show a little concern. Instead, she was made to feel like a burden. Every time she asked him to take her to the doctor, Juma brushed it aside. "You'll be fine. Just rest," he would say, before leaving for his business with friends. The man who had once promised to protect her now refused to even sit by her side when she cried quietly in the night. Zuri tried to hide her pain, but her body refused to listen. She would collapse in the market, stumble while washing clothes, or grow dizzy while simply standing. Neighbors whispered, wondering why her husband wasn't doing more. But Zuri stayed silent, too ashamed to admit the truth. She was suffering alone in a marriage that was supposed to be her safe place. What hurt her most was not just the sickness in her body, but the coldness in Juma's heart. She remembered how he once said, "Zuri, we are one. Your pain is my pain." Now he treated her illness as an inconvenience, a waste of his money and time. Each day she felt her strength slipping, but even more painfully, she felt her marriage slipping too. Still Zuri held on to hope. She prayed for healing, she prayed for Juma's heart to soften, she prayed that one morning she would wake up and things would be different. But her prayers were met with silence, and her reality was harsher with each passing day. Her health was breaking her body, and Juma's indifference was breaking her spirit. Yet somewhere deep inside, a small light remained, her will to survive, even if the man she trusted most refused to see her suffering. One night, Zuri's body finally gave up. She had been feeling weak all day, but she pushed herself to finish her chores, hoping Juma would notice and show a little care. Instead, he barely looked at her. Later that night, as she tried to stand, her legs failed her. A sharp pain shot through her chest, and within seconds, everything around her turned dark. She collapsed to the floor. The neighbors heard the noise and rushed in. They lifted her limp body, panic written across their faces. Juma followed reluctantly, more annoyed than worried, as they hurried her to the nearest hospital. Under the harsh white lights of the emergency room, doctors quickly checked her condition. Her pulse was faint and her breathing shallow. The lead doctor turned to Juma and said, "We need to start treatment immediately, but the payment must be made first." Zuri, half conscious, opened her eyes just enough to see Juma's face. For a moment, she hoped he would finally choose her, finally put her life above his money. But instead, he folded his arms across his chest, his eyes cold. "I won't waste money on her," he said firmly. His words echoed through the room, heavier than the silence that followed. Zuri felt her heart crack. She wanted to cry out, to ask him why, to remind him of the vows he once made. But her lips only trembled, and tears rolled down her cheeks. In that moment, she understood the truth she had tried to deny. She was alone in her marriage. The man who promised forever had already abandoned her, even while she was fighting for her life. The doctors exchanged worried glances. A nurse whispered, "She won't survive without treatment." Still, Juma stood there, unmoved, like a stranger watching someone else's tragedy. He turned away from Zuri's tear-filled eyes, as if her pain no longer belonged to him. Lying there, weak and broken, Zuri's body begged her to give up. But her spirit refused. Even through her tears, a quiet strength stirred inside her. She thought of her late parents, of the dreams she once had, of the life she still wanted to live. She realized that her survival could not depend on Juma. If she lived, it would be because of her own will to fight, not because of the man who turned his back on her. The hospital room felt cold and heavy, but Zuri's heart began to grow stronger in its silence. She had lost her husband's love, his support, his care, but she refused to lose herself. Her tears fell like rivers, yet behind them, a fire began to burn. She promised herself that if she survived this night, she would never again beg for the love of someone who could watch her suffer and choose to do nothing. Lying weak on the hospital bed, Zuri felt her world collapsing. She had always believed that family was a safe place, a shelter when storms became too heavy. Since Juma had turned his back on her, she thought at least his family would stand with her. She had cooked for them, cared for them, and treated them like her own blood. With hope still clinging to her heart, she asked for them. Maybe they would see her suffering and remember all the time she had given them love. When her in-laws finally arrived, Zuri's eyes filled with relief. She tried to sit up, her frail body trembling, but she forced a weak smile. "Mama, Baba, please, I need your help. The doctors say I must continue my treatment." Her voice cracked, but her heart begged for mercy. For a moment, she waited for kindness, but instead came words sharper than knives. Her mother-in-law crossed her arms and looked down at her coldly. "Zuri, you are nothing but a burden. We cannot waste money on someone who only brings problems." Her father-in-law nodded in agreement, his face hard and unforgiving. "If you are weak, that is your problem. Don't expect us to carry you." The words crashed into Zuri like waves of fire. She had believed these people were her family. She had laughed with them, served them, and stood by them. Yet now, when her life depended on them, they turned their backs without hesitation. Her tears fell silently onto the pillow, her chest aching not just from sickness but from the betrayal that burned deeper than her illness. She remembered countless evenings when she stayed awake cooking meals for them, making sure their home was filled with warmth. She remembered the way she once called her mother-in-law Mama, with genuine love, believing it was more than just a title. Now that love was thrown back in her face. "Do not look at us like that," her sister-in-law added cruelly. "If you cannot even take care of yourself, then what good are you to this family?" Laughter followed her words, mocking Zuri's pain. The hospital room, once filled with the hope of family support, now echoed with rejection. Zuri turned her face to the wall, hiding her tears. Every breath felt heavy, but not as heavy as the emptiness inside her heart. She realized she was truly alone. Her husband had abandoned her, and his family had cast her away as though she was nothing. But even in that moment of heartbreak, a quiet strength stirred inside her. She whispered to herself, "I may be broken now, but I will not stay broken forever." Her spirit refused to die, even as everyone around her tried to bury her in cruelty. As her in-laws walked out of the room, leaving her to fight alone, Zuri's tears turned into silent prayers. If no one would save her, she would wait for the day she could save herself. Deep down, she knew her story was not ending, it was only beginning. Days passed, and Zuri's body grew weaker. Each breath felt heavier than the last, and the silence of her hospital room pressed down on her like a weight she could not carry. The doctors did what little they could, but without money, her treatment was limited. She stared at the ceiling, wondering if this was how her story would end, abandoned by her husband, rejected by her in-laws, and left to fade away quietly. Her heart ached more than her body, not because of the sickness, but because the people she had loved the most had proven she meant nothing to them. One evening, as the sun set and painted the room in a dull orange glow, the door creaked open. A man walked in slowly, carrying a brown leather briefcase. His hair was silver, his glasses rested low on his nose, and his steps were gentle, almost cautious, as if he carried not just files but also the weight of news that could change a life. Zuri looked at him, confused, her voice faint. "Who are you?" The elderly man offered a kind smile and pulled a chair closer to her bed. "My name is Mr. Kato," he said softly. "I am a lawyer, and I've come with important news for you." He opened his briefcase and carefully placed a stack of papers on the small hospital table. Zuri's tired eyes blinked as she tried to focus. "News, for me," she whispered, barely believing anyone would come to see her. "Yes," he replied. "Your late uncle, Mr. Baraka, the businessman from Daru, has left behind his entire estate in your name. The will was finalized just days ago. You, Zuri, are now the sole heir to his fortune." For a moment, Zuri thought she had misheard. Her uncle, the man who used to visit her with gifts when she was a little girl, who always told her she was special. She remembered how kind he had been before he passed away, but she had never expected this. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness this time, but from shock and gratitude. "Me. He left it all to me." Mr. Kato nodded firmly. "Yes. The businesses, the properties, the accounts. Everything is yours now." Zuri's trembling hands covered her mouth as a flood of emotions rushed through her. Just hours ago, she had been preparing herself to die, believing she had no reason left to hold on. Now, in the middle of her darkest hour, a door of hope had opened. She was not just going to live, she was going to rise. Her tears rolled freely, but these were not the same helpless tears of betrayal. They were tears of relief, of second chances, of faith returning. She realized God had not forgotten her. When everyone else abandoned her, a blessing had found its way to her bedside. That night, for the first time in weeks, Zuri closed her eyes not in despair, but in peace. Her fight was not over. It was only beginning, and this time she had the strength and the means to win. Zuri's life began to change the moment the lawyer's words sank into her heart. For the first time in months, she felt a spark of hope flicker inside her. With her uncle's inheritance, she had the power to choose life. The very next day, she signed the papers, and her treatment began properly. No longer did the doctors hesitate or whisper about unpaid bills. Instead, they moved with urgency and care, giving her the best medicine, the finest attention, and the hope she had been desperately craving. Day by day, her strength returned. The woman who once lay weak and forgotten began to sit up, then stand, and eventually walk again. The hospital staff who had once pitied her, now looked at her with admiration. Her pale skin slowly regained its glow, her weak body grew stronger, and her eyes, once dim with sadness, now carried a light that could not be ignored. When she finally left the hospital, it was not in the same broken state she had entered. She walked out with her head held high, dressed with dignity, her steps steady and proud. People who had whispered about her weakness now gasped when they saw her. "Is that really Zuri?" they asked, shocked at the transformation. She was no longer the frail woman they had seen struggling in the market or collapsing on the roadside. She looked like a queen who had risen from the ashes of her own pain. Zuri did not waste her second chance. She surrounded herself with the best doctors who continued to care for her health, but she also did more than that. She began to rebuild her life from the ground up. She moved into her uncle's home temporarily and started making plans for her future. Every corner of the mansion reminded her that she was no longer helpless, that she had been given the strength to stand on her own. What stunned everyone the most was not just her wealth, but the way she carried herself. She did not walk with arrogance, nor did she seek revenge against those who betrayed her. Instead, she carried herself with quiet dignity, showing the world that pain had not destroyed her, it had made her stronger. Her glow was not just from health, but from the peace she had found within herself. The same neighbors who once pitied her now watched in awe. Some whispered with regret, remembering how they doubted her survival. Others simply admired her courage. Zuri, however, no longer needed anyone's approval. She had faced death, betrayal, and abandonment, yet here she was, alive, beautiful, and unshaken. Her story was no longer one of weakness. It was a story of strength, of rising after being pushed to the ground. Zuri had been broken, but she had rebuilt herself piece by piece, and the result was a woman no one could ignore. She had truly risen from the ashes, and her glow stunned not just her enemies, but the entire city of Makando. When the news of Zuri's inheritance spread through Makando, it traveled like fire in the wind. Everyone spoke about how the woman who once lay on her deathbed had now become the heir to a fortune beyond imagination. And of course, the whispers soon reached Juma. The same man who had abandoned her in her weakest moment suddenly remembered he had a wife. Juma wasted no time. He dressed himself in his finest clothes, polished his shoes, and practiced the sweetest words he could think of. To the outside world, he appeared like a loving husband rushing to his wife's side. But in his heart there was no love, only greed. He saw her wealth as his second chance, not their marriage. When Juma arrived at Zuri's mansion, he wore a wide smile, as if nothing had ever gone wrong. "My Zuri," he said softly, trying to sound emotional, "I have missed you every single day. I was a fool before, but now I realize you are my only love." His words dripped with false sweetness, but his eyes betrayed him. They searched the room, counting the signs of wealth, the golden decorations, the grand furniture. Zuri listened silently. She sat with calm grace, dressed in elegance, her health fully restored, her spirit unbroken. Her silence was powerful. Juma mistook it for hesitation and moved closer. "You must know," he continued, "that I always loved you. Everything I did out of stress, not because I didn't care. But now, I promise to be the husband you deserve." Inside, Zuri's heart remembered every tear she had cried, every cruel word he had thrown at her, every moment he chose money over her life. And now, the same man dared to come back with empty promises. For a moment, she almost laughed at the irony. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to fight. Her silence said more than words ever could. The calm way she looked at him, the way she refused to answer his lies, made Juma grow restless. He shifted uncomfortably, his smile fading as the weight of her gaze pressed against him. "Zuri, say something," he pleaded, his voice cracking slightly. But she remained still, her strength shining brighter than any argument she could have given. That was when Juma realized the truth. He had lost her forever. Not just her love, but her respect, her trust, her heart. He could not manipulate her anymore. The woman he once controlled had turned into a woman he could never reach again. Zuri finally stood, her presence towering over his false confidence. Without a single word, she turned her back and walked away, leaving him standing in the middle of the grand room, surrounded by the wealth he would never touch. Juma had returned with arrogance, believing he could win her back with lies. But Zuri's silence, strong and unshaken, crushed him more than any angry words ever could. It was the silence of a woman who no longer belonged to him. The mansion stood tall on the hill, overlooking the city of Makando like a jewel catching the sun. It was wide, with shining marble floors, tall glass windows, and gardens that stretched endlessly. For Zuri, stepping into her uncle's grand home felt like stepping into a different world. Not long ago, she had been lying on a hospital bed, helpless and forgotten. Now she walked through halls lined with chandeliers, her head high, her heart steady, her dignity restored. Every morning, she would stand on the wide balcony of the mansion, the cool breeze brushing against her face. From there, she could see the market below, the same place where she once struggled to walk, fainting under the harsh stares of neighbors. She remembered the whispers, the pity, the way Juma mocked her weakness as if her illness was her fault. But now the whispers were different. "Is that really Zuri?" people asked in amazement. "She looks like a queen." Others shook their heads in disbelief. "We thought she would never survive. And now look at her." The same streets that once witnessed her pain now echoed with awe at her transformation. Zuri carried herself with quiet grace. She wore elegant dresses not to show off, but because she finally had the freedom to live with dignity. Her health had returned, her smile was brighter, and her eyes carried a strength that drew people in. She was no longer the woman begging for care or attention. She was a woman who had risen above betrayal. Inside the mansion, she filled the empty rooms with life. She created spaces of warmth and laughter, choosing kindness over bitterness. Though she had been hurt deeply, she refused to let hatred poison her heart. She helped the poor around Makando, paying school fees for children, supporting widows, and providing food for families. Every good deed she did became another whisper in the city, this time whispers of admiration. Meanwhile, Juma could not escape the sight of her transformation. From the streets below, he would sometimes see her standing on the balcony, radiant and untouchable. He remembered the days he mocked her, the moments he refused to pay for her medicine, the cruel words he spoke at her weakest hour. And now, the very woman he abandoned looked down at the city with strength that silenced him. Zuri did not look at the market with anger. She looked with calmness, with the strength of someone who had survived the fire and come out shining brighter. The mansion on the hill was not just a house. It was a symbol of her journey, proof that she had risen from the ashes. People in Makando began to tell her story like a tale of hope. If Zuri could rise, anyone can, they said. And as she stood on her balcony each evening, the sun setting behind her, she knew her life had become more than survival. It had become an inspiration. The city of Makando buzzed with excitement the day Zuri was invited to a public event. It was a grand ceremony, filled with leaders, businessmen, and women who had made a mark in society. Zuri, dressed with elegance and grace, walked into the hall with her head held high. She had once entered hospitals with trembling steps, but now she entered grand gatherings with confidence that made people turn and admire. Whispers followed her wherever she went, whispers of respect and amazement. But not everyone admired her with pure intentions. In the crowd, Juma watched closely, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with envy. He could not accept what Zuri had become. The woman he once mocked, the wife he abandoned in sickness, was now living a life far greater than his own. And worse, she had done it without him. His pride would not allow him to stay silent. As Zuri greeted the guests, Juma suddenly stepped forward. His voice was loud, sharp, meant to humiliate. "This woman is my wife," he shouted, pointing at her as the entire hall turned to look. "She owes me. Everything she has belongs to me. As her husband, I demand my share of her fortune." Gasps filled the room. Some people looked at Juma with disgust, others with shock. Zuri, however, remained calm. She stood tall, her face composed, her silence louder than his words. Her lack of reaction only fueled Juma's anger. He waved his arms, his voice rising higher. "Zuri, tell them you are nothing without me. You cannot ignore your husband." But as he spoke, something strange happened. His voice cracked, his breath grew shallow, and sweat dripped down his forehead. In the middle of his rant, Juma's knees buckled. His face went pale, and before anyone could stop him, he collapsed to the floor with a heavy thud. The hall erupted in chaos. People rushed to his side, but Zuri did not move. She watched silently, her heart steady. This was not revenge nor satisfaction. It was simply the truth revealing itself. Juma had come to confront her with arrogance, but instead, he was struck down by the weight of his own betrayal. The woman he had once called a burden now stood untouchable, powerful in her silence, while he lay broken on the ground before everyone's eyes. Some whispered that it was karma, others said it was shame that brought him down. Whatever the reason, the message was clear. Zuri no longer lived in Juma's shadow. He had tried to drag her down in public, but instead, the world witnessed his collapse and her strength. Zuri did not look at him with hatred. She simply turned her face away, her dignity shining brighter than ever. The hall was no longer filled with his angry words. It was filled with the quiet respect people now had for her. Juma had collapsed in betrayal, but Zuri stood tall, proving once again that no amount of cruelty could destroy her. Zuri stood still for a moment, looking down at Juma as he lay weak and humiliated before the crowd. Her heart did not race with anger, nor did she feel the urge for revenge. Instead, there was only calm strength inside her. This was the man who once turned his back on her when she was gasping for life in a hospital bed. This was the man who called her a burden, who left her to suffer alone. And now, he was the one lying broken, begging for dignity. She took a step closer, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the silence of the room. "You refused to stand by me when I was weak," she said softly. "So you don't deserve me now that I am strong." Her words were not shouted, yet they carried more power than any scream could. Every ear in the hall heard them, every heart felt them. Juma's eyes filled with regret, but Zuri did not wait for his response. She turned away, her elegant dress sweeping the floor as she walked out of the hall. The crowd parted for her, their eyes full of admiration. She no longer walked as the abandoned wife who had once begged for love. She walked as a woman reborn, carrying freedom, dignity, and hope with every step. Outside, the evening sky stretched wide, glowing with colors of a new dawn. Zuri breathed deeply, her heart light for the first time in years. She was no longer chained by betrayal or pain. The road ahead was hers to walk, and it promised peace, success, and joy. Behind her, Juma was left in his regret, but Zuri walked into a new beginning, free, strong, and unshaken.